I mean, all art's technology, you know, the spraying ochre on the wall in the hand, and cave art is technology, in a sense, painting's technology. Digital technology is moving very quickly, and so, you know, one of the roles of the artists is to question where the culture is going, and particularly now, because things are moving so quickly, at least to be a voice in what is. I'm not thinking of it again like that it's a role like I have to deliver this big answer. I'm not sure what any single artist can do like that. Often when people talk about technology, let's just say Americans talk about technology, there is this suggestion that it's us and technology, sort of like us and killer whales or something. And I don't see technology that way. I see it as an extension of us, just like a hammer is an extension of our hand. Our technology is an extension of us. If at some point there is only digital technology and the biologic humans are gone and a thing of the past, then that's humanity. That's what it became. So I just see it as this linear projection. I don't see it as us and them. It can only come from us. And this starts to feel a lot like thinking about consciousness and mind. You know, when we have a probe that's out leaving our solar system, that's our mind, that's us. At least that's how I think about it. That is literally our mind going out into space, because what else is it? So this idea of thinking about what is technology, I mean, I think that gets to sort of a core of it. I went into geology in university because I thought, what career is going to take me to the ends of the world and pay me to do it and explore? And so I explored as a geologist. I was in very remote places in the Arctic, started photographing. That led to a career in photojournalism and photography. So this notion of exploring has been along all the way. I mean, I think of myself as an explorer. And then beginning to work in the field of art was simply a way to explore in a manner that I couldn't do in any other sort of, let's call it, genre field. It's this territory that encourages a lot of hybridization. I think of hybridization as what I do. I'm working with technology, but I also like to be in big sort of primary nature, and I'm bringing ideas together through all of that. The joy and stimulation that I get from being in rainforests or in the Arctic or scuba diving or in these environments that feed me so much. One, in a sense, I want to mimic that discovery in my art process, but I also want to deliver that in the art. When the art goes in public, you know, I hope there's a sense of wonder and curiosity, and, you know, what you read out of the poem is what you get from it. The poet, you know, intended something else. I make this thing, and it's something to me, but it's something else to you, and that's very clear, that's understood. I mean, in many ways, I think that my role as an artist, and perhaps one of the things that's different than scientists, is I feel, not to put too fine a point on it, but I feel like my role is to ask questions through the work, both of myself and in the works. And maybe, you know, when that work is in a space as it is now, you say, well, what the hell is that? Whereas in science, the scientist is looking to provide answers. I'm looking to provide questions, scientists looking to provide answers. The scientist's answers are iterative. They lead to more questions. They always do. And art sort of shares that same thing. It's this continuum. It's evolution. You know, being this artist, I fell into this really sort of thrilling territory that was very open. And that way is very much like exploration. One of the things I knew coming even out of high school and then into university when I went off to Southeast Asia to explore is I knew that those last truly archaic cultures were almost done. And now, 25 years later, they are, in fact, you know. So I knew that if I was going to do that, I had to do it then. Somehow I knew that. So it wasn't, well, I could wait and do that later and I'll be an artist. Now, also I had to make a living in photography, provided that actually I'm also interested in mind. You know, I spent time in monasteries in Tibet. I was around Hinduism in India. I mean, I explored religions. I'm not religious, but I explored it because I wanted to know. I'm interested in other ways of thinking, other ways of being. And fundamentally, that comes down to consciousness. So what is this thing that we associate with between our ears, whether that's where it is or not? And what is, you know, that's part of what's in here. What is, at what time, at what point does the machine become conscious, which is the AI question. The thing behind me, I don't think is going to get conscious, but it's posing that question. It's a physical manifestation of the question of machine consciousness. So we're sitting in front of the rocket brain. This is an interactive sculpture I built. It really came about because I do salvaging. I go into aerospace salvage yards, sort of junk yards with shiny material, not rusty material. And I found a missile guidance system for sale on eBay. I was having a drink. It's in the middle of the night. I'm looking around here before bed. And I found a missile guidance system for sale on eBay. I thought that's kind of crazy. And so much of art is the story. So before I even got going, this is part of a very interesting story, missile guidance system for sale on eBay. So I looked at it a little bit. It wasn't very expensive. I hit the buy it now button, went to bed. You know, this thing arrives, and I opened it up and took it apart, and it had all these tags, and I started to research where the little bits were made in the period, and I found out that it was built in the 70s for NASA. It came out of Alaska, so it came out of some missile range up there, you know. And then this gave me this opportunity to start to think, what do I do with it? The gyro still worked. The parts were very beautiful. The circuits are that period in the 70s where everything's still visible with the naked eye, which is really exciting. I mean, aesthetically, I love circuit boards and circuit design. I mean, they are drawn initially, and then they're sort of like a manifested drawing with perfect logic by definition. And so one had already had all these built-in aesthetics and references, and then I started to develop my ideas around it. So I thought, you know, bring it back to life. It's a little bit Frankenstein. So what's going on in here is there's the gyro spinning. On the video screen in there is bioluminescent jellyfish and comb jellies, which are right at the bottom of the tree of life. So I'm very interested in this idea of one, evolution in the broadest sense. Also the very beginnings, how does that lead to intelligence? How does that relate to circuits? And then all the way up to machine intelligence and AI, which is something I'm very interested. You know, what is the role that AI is going to play in our future as a species and in the planet's future, in fact? Is AI going to say the biggest problem with Earth are the humans? It's a possibility. And this is a territory that an artist can explore. I mean, this is philosophy, this is existential, this is all of it. So a lot of these ideas are in this piece. The piece has a proximity sensor, so the speed of the gyro responds to the proximity of the viewer. And there's some randomization built into the coding, so it's not exactly a one-to-one thing. It's not an arcade piece. The viewer becomes aware, the art is aware it's being viewed. So it creates this loop. It's a little bit like, is she or he looking at me across the bar? It's that kind of thing. I think that's very interesting because it's referencing, like, when does machine intelligence become self-aware, sentient, or higher level? So in there, we have the glass cone around it was commissioned from a master glass worker at one of the last medical glass facilities in the US. Did this fantastic piece. It's very squid-like in many ways. You know, and I'm an avid scuba diver, so I'm also looking at squid, cuttlefish. This is squid-like. The fiber optic cables up in here run off of a random pattern generator, so it's referencing bioluminescent signaling. So there is this real nod to the biomorphic. But, you know, with so much of what's going on right now, I mean, a big part of what I've always done is environmental. And, you know, that's a major concern right now with all the things that are going on in the planet and politically. And so, I mean, that brings me to another aspect of this. And I don't think of my work as being political per se, but you kind of can't be interested in the environment without being political. And so there's a lot of ideas wrapped up in that piece. So I have another question that I've been asking, and some of the scientists asked you, and by the way, this is one of the things that's really interesting about being around NASA scientists, SETI scientists, scientists in general, but I'm around scientists a fair bit, is these questions and conversations exactly like we're having now are kind of thrilling. It's very interesting. So a question that I'm asking now is this. If we could suggest, without losing our heads in this country, that religion has outgrown its usefulness, that it was necessary at a certain part of human evolution, which clearly it was, then what if art similarly was necessary at a certain part of human evolution? And if AI got so intelligent and powerful, which I think it will, that it becomes perfectly logical. Because I imagine, wouldn't it become perfectly logical? And would a perfectly logical system have any use for art? Why would it? So it's something that I've been thinking about. And I haven't heard anybody else ask that question, but I've been posing it a little bit recently. So, so there we are, but it also, it sets up these hard sort of boundaries that enable conversations in between. Well, carbon has this, it's this material and an emulsion that I develop that ends up in very high resolution imagery. It's also a process that I wasn't controlling. I was influencing and manipulating, but I was really relinquishing control, which I liked, so that the material would show me unexpected things. And then, really in a sort of a photographic language, I realized that I could enlarge those images very big. I mean, I printed them up to 10 by 60 feet off of an original that was 5 inches long, let's say. And it really held up. And so that was a way to create worlds, basically. I mean, that was the place where it went from being a thing and a possibility to creating worlds. And in fact, carbon really led to all these environments I'm doing now, which are even, call them installations or environments. And some of them I'm only using sound, but really carbon led to that. Because that was the point where I went from photographs in frames in a white gallery where people whispered and you could hear the garbage trucks outside, to going, no, I'd like to really control the environment so that you come in and you're nowhere else but in that environment. And this has both actual and philosophical references to meditation and concentration, what I experience when I fly fish, where you're just in one place and you're nowhere else. That could be in a monastery in Tibet, or that could be out in nature, but I want to bring people into a place that's it is just that thing itself. I was creating this unknown world, so you could go into this place that you're unfamiliar with, and then experience the sensations and emotions of being in an unfamiliar space. If you're into a place you just don't know. And I like what happens in those places. How did life begin on Earth? Where, is it panspermia? What is it? And so in many ways it was an artistic process thinking about that, or certainly influenced by that idea of, and so I'm literally playing with the building blocks of life when I'm playing with carbon. I'm also adding electricity, because sometimes when I'm working on these big negatives, I put a pro-level battery charger on there, so I'm running a current across my negative base, which is very much, we have these ideas that, lightning and electricity was involved in the formation of life through carbon as a material, through water. So I'm literally playing with the building blocks of life. And then I'm setting out this experiment. And in this experiment, I'm creating conditions for something to happen. But I'm manipulating, but I'm not being over-controlling. I mean, it's really a trick to just let it sort of do its thing. And then these pictures would appear on these negatives. Thrilling pictures to me, very high-resolution pictures. And we read high-resolution imagery as truth, more than we do blurry imagery. That had all these possibilities inherent to it. High resolution. So whatever you see there, even though you've never seen it before, it portrays it as a truth. And this gets into all levels of perception and psychology and how images work and how we see, and a lot of territory that, well, certainly any visual artist is interested in. So then it was a natural, in some manner speaking, to take it small and make it large. I mean, this is a great American tradition in art. It's not gratuitous size. It's to see what happens when that world becomes bigger than we are. And my wife's working with leafcutter ants in Costa Rica. They're considered the greatest social species outside of humans. What if they were 6 feet or 2 meters tall instead of that big? It's sort of like that. You know, we perceive things differently with size. And hopefully it's a kind of a gift. I mean, it's creating a space generally in an urban location where people are coming off this city street in this place they sort of think they know, and then you're coming into something else. So carbon led to that, and it also led to so many of these explorations I'm doing, because then when you start thinking about what is an environment, I mean, that goes all the way from giant spaces to, in fact, having a VR headset on. One of the interesting aspects and sort of benefits of carbon, and this is one of the things that I really appreciate through art that I seldom hear artists speak about, is it's through the art and presenting the art that my greatest and most fulfilling friendships have come. So somebody responds to the art, it's like this volley out into the world, and somebody picks it up and then says, come look at, you know, and it creates these like rivulets that become bigger things. And so carbon led to the interaction with Jill Tarter, that led to the SETI Institute residency, my relationship with NASA, and so many things that have come. I mean, in a linear progression, it was the beginning of so much of what I'm doing now. May 2010, I was in New York, and I happened to meet the great astronomer Jill Tarter in New York. She was receiving an award. I just went up and said, Mrs. Tarter, I'm a big fan of your work, and I gave her a catalog of my carbon work, a recent show, big installation that I'd done. And I just said, thank you very much, and I walked away and went back, you know, to their table. And it wasn't a few minutes, and there was a hand on my shoulder, and I said, I'd like you to tell me what these pictures are about. So she said, come on, let's go in the foyer so we don't bug the next speaker. And so we had this sort of quick conversation in which we became friends in that way that some people do and a few times in a life. And so I told her about the work I was doing, the carbon and what they were. She was very intrigued. And then she said, what can I do for you? And I said, well, nothing, you're doing it. You're an enormous inspiration. And she said, come on, you can do better than that. I said, I'd love to visit the observatory. So she said, well, I'm going there next month. Why don't you come? And she just said, the only problem is that all the beds are taken. I said, can I camp outside? Fine, bring it. You know, so I brought my tent and sleeping bag. And we were walking around at night there, Northern California, at the Allen Telescope Array, which is where SETI listens for signals from aliens, technologically advanced civilizations. Technology is what they listen for. I'd brought some good California red wine, and we were out under the dishes having a glass of wine, looking up at the stars, talking about existence and space and things like this. And she told me about the SETI Institute, where about 80 top astroscientists are doing research. And that's based in Mountain View. And I said, do you have an artist in residence program? You know, this is happening at a lot of research facilities now. And she said, no, people have talked about it. Long and short, we ended up speaking with the CEO, and I became the beta test. I got to occupy the world's largest wind tunnel for almost 3 days, 24-hour access, and I used it as an acoustic chamber. And I actually amplified recordings I'd made in Costa Rica, in one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, in that giant space. I did not have 300-mile-an-hour winds in there at the time. I mean, really, it was kind of a study in psychology, because I was thinking about what's the difference between experiencing these sounds in the rainforest when I'm sitting on a tarp recording them, to listening to them amplified in this big space that has just about no biodiversity. There's some microbes in the air, probably. I ended up pairing with Dr. Lawrence Doyle, who's currently working on speed of light experiments and quantum astronomy, an amazing man. But he'd written the algorithms that determined that humpback whales' communications exhibit syntax, strongly inferring its language. So I was interested in that, and I ended up using that in a work that was called Code Humpback. That showed recently at Mass MoCA and incorporates Morse code. So it was really a work that was using both messaging, which is very SETI in many ways, and also thinking about animal communications at a high level and interspecies communications. So it was bringing a lot of ideas in. When I did the first installation of the Code Humpback, which are these scoops that project sound and light and are driven by Morse code messages, which I wrote, one of which was, "What are the whales saying?" The other is, "All we need is love." I was very curious how Lawrence would experience that installation. He went into the space and spent time, and you could see he was really taking it in. And he came out and he just said this thing, he just said, "Spontaneous comprehension. That's what art can deliver that science rarely does." And so that's become almost a mantra for us of why put artists with scientists at the SETI Institute. The scientists are, in general, and these are top scientists of our day, nearly ignorant of contemporary art. They don't follow it and they don't know very much about it. And a whole period of like 20 years of contemporary art has happened, and these leading scientists, these amazing minds, super smart people, know very little bit about it. So my question there is, what is going on? Is it simply that they're maxed out with their own science, or that they live in these, which is a bit of a cliche, these sort of tunnels of inquiry? Or is it that contemporary art just isn't speaking to them about things that they're interested in? I don't have the answer to that. Our greatest minds that are thinking about the questions that I'm thinking about as an artist, a large chunk of them are the greatest science fiction writers of our day. And there's this interesting question of why science fiction has been sidelined in our culture for a long time. I think it's largely come out of that. Is it because it's scary? I don't know, but some of our best writers have been science fiction writers. J.G. Ballard was great. I went back recently and started rereading Ballard, and I just can't believe what he was writing in the 60s. I mean, it was incredible. He was doing mescaline and writing science fiction, and a lot of it is it's prescient today. I had a big interest in science fiction, both in reading. I read a lot as a kid. I'm working in China now. I'm doing a show this summer, so I've been reading Chinese science fiction just because I'm interested in that culture. I mean, Shanghai is already very sci-fi, as is in Beijing in many ways, in a sort of Blade Runner scape kind of thing. So I'm getting involved there, and one of the things that I spoke a little bit about earlier is there's the point where you're making the work, kind of a private thing, even if you're working with other individuals. And then there's a place, where you put it in public. So I also think it's important to understand the context of the culture where it's going to be seen. Symbols are very important in China, so I've been getting interested in things I'm working with. In fact, the work I'm doing in China is a wind tunnel. So I did work NASA Ames wind tunnel. I'm actually building a wind tunnel in China at a contemporary art museum with 8 big industrial fans that are going to be choreographed to create kind of a symphony of wind. A lot of wind, as much wind as is legal in a public space, or it might require safety glasses. So that's very much influenced by some work I did at the Fluid Mechanics Lab at NASA Ames this past year, where I was putting a couple artworks in the fluid mechanics tanks where they visualized turbulence around the early space shuttle models. So, that's definitely a loop that's been influenced by some of the access I've had at NASA Ames. And I'm very grateful for that. That's been really, really exceptional. We're speaking about this relationship with artists and NASA. And one of the things that's been so great is to speak at, and sometimes it's just in more of a mode of a brief encounter, like a tour in a lab, and then I'm able to pursue conversations later with people that have, say, similar interests. So, I've been speaking with scientists at the Mars labs. I'm speaking with astrobiologists, roboticists. There are a lot of meeting points in our conversations. A love of science fiction is often one of them. And if you look at the work that I'm making, some of it's right out of science fiction. But one of the things that happens when I acquire this equipment, which has become junk, these are things that were built for hundreds of thousands of dollars and I buy for $1,000. And then I modify and I add to them and I turn them into objects, is that I'm researching what that was actually used for, how it was built, what the physics are, what its intended use is. So all these objects I'm getting that I'm attracted to them aesthetically initially, and then there's this opportunity to do all this autodidact research, and I'm nothing if not an autodidact. I have been my whole life. So every one of these objects offers, in a sense, an education. And that's very similar to how I worked as a photojournalist. There were places and topics I was interested in, and every time I went in to work on those were micro, intense educations. And so I think, I did paint, and I educated myself about painting, not just what it feels like to do it, and what you learn from doing it, and you learn a lot from doing it. And then learning about what other painters were doing, but that was just like one module in the larger picture that I'm building as the artist that I'm becoming. I mean, I hope it's becoming until, I check out. I hope it doesn't stop. That's part of it. I like a broad territory. In my studio, there's a lot going on. I mean, I play electric cello through effects and amplifiers. And one of the reasons I like that in a studio, as opposed to, let's say, the idea of a painter that's doing one thing for decades, is I have a number of things going on in my studio. So if I don't feel like doing that today, I'll go do that today. And that's the playground that I've built in my studio, and that works for me. Living an interesting life, and this is something that is sort of implicit in everything that I've done. And I always thought that, as much as one could afford to, I've always wanted a very interesting life. And I do think, I mean, it's an old idea, but the art is the life you lead. It's not just the thing that you leave behind. It's this whole process of who we influence and converse with and share with, and what we build and what comes through it. And then something's done, and then you move on and do it again.